We're going to talk about the listing agreement today. We're going to talk about some options for that, a couple other forms that have come about. Let's get through what we can, and then we're going to have a comparison of a couple forms. I have talked to Patrick Daly at length. I've talked to Robert Scott in Birmingham at length. I don't think their approaches could be any different, any more different, I should say, than they already are, because people are approaching this totally differently. I'm talking about buyer's agency, I'm talking about listing agreements, I'm talking about change agreements. For example, Robert Scott with his group, everybody knows Robert pretty well, Birmingham, big outfit, I don't know how many 100 agents he has, but they are starting out with a transaction brokerage agreement for 3 days when they work with a buyer that has 0% written into it. Then when they narrow down on a property, they're switching to a buyer's agency agreement that has a percentage they're gonna pursue. And then he said they're not even calling the listing agent to ask what's being offered. He said, I don't give a shit what's being offered, I'm gonna write in the purchase agreement what I want. And we're gonna go from there. Now, I see some flaws with that, and Rebecca brought it up the other day. So, Robert, what if you put in 3% and they counter back with, no, we're willing to pay you 1%? Then it's a function of your potential greed, how you look, if you're gonna fight for more percentage. And let's remember that they can sign that purchase agreement. They can sign that counteroffer at 1%.
But you switched to a buyer agency, so you had some agreement with your buyer.
Right,
Okay, at that point.
right, and yeah,
Okay,
they
if you
would,
made an offer and you put 3% and they come back with 1, you have some sort of agreement with your buyer.
before you even showed them a house,
That's
right?
right.
And it potentially says 3 on it. That would be your recourse, but now you get into a bit of a situation with your buyer. Let's go over these forms,
I think you're gonna get in that
and
situation.
we'll have time to chat. Okay. Oh, holy crap.
This is the first light. You can turn that light on if you want.
Yeah, that would help me if that's all right with y'all.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Much better, yes.
There's not that many changes in the listing agreement. Dominic, what do we really have here? This attached Bob and Richard.
I just was bringing this to everybody's attention. This is actually in the current listing agreement, and I never noticed it until now. So I guess unless you're gonna attach the, the input form that MLS provides, unless you're gonna fill that out and attach it, you need to cross through this.
Wow.
Does anybody do that within there? It says that your seller property input form is part of this listing agreement. Who's ever done one of those?
Never.
I did, and then I realized I didn't need to.
So, Dominic's right, I'm gonna start striking this language and saying, we're gonna handle the input back at the office based on the information you provided. Now, you guys need to fill out that input form to do it, to post the listing.
Where is it? Oh, in yellow. I'm looking at the first paragraph.
Right here.
I don't even know why that's in there.
Why would that be in there?
I don't know.
I was taught years ago that that's how you,
Yeah, 30 years ago.
and they take, all right. It's been a while, appreciate that. But filling out that form with your client in their dining room takes somewhere in the neighborhood between 3 and 7 days. I mean, so, Tom, we just wanted to bring this to our attention that that language is in there. Come on in, Chuckles.
Or either.
All right, what do we got here, Dee?
Sorry.
That's okay. Seller authorized listing board to place the listing into multiple listing service and/or listing or advertising platform chosen by the listing broker on X date. Seller understands the listing broker as a member of the multiple listing service must follow the rules and regulations of each MLS. Is this new language? Steve?
Yes, yes.
This is new language, so if they ask why aren't you advertising whatever commissions, because we can't. Compensation to the listing broker. Okay? The big bold language is something that has always been in effect since the beginning of time, that commissions are negotiable. They're not set by anybody, they're not set by your broker. I'll never tell you, despite some brokers I've spoken to recently, I will never tell you what you can charge commission-wise. I will never insist on anything like that, because you're independent contractors, that's your business plan, and if you choose to work at a different fee schedule, and you find it successful, then I'm not gonna tell you different. So here you have an opportunity to either get paid a flat fee, or a percentage equal to amount of the gross sales price. No changes, no changes, and no changes. Okay, paragraph 25. Paragraph 25, you know, and keep in mind the big change, and for those of you that sat in the session with Wendy Alley and Jennifer Fauch, they told you there was gonna be a paragraph in the listing agreement that talked about buyer's agency compensation. The board of Baldwin Realtors voted to strike that language at the advice of council, and they no longer have any reference. The only reference to anything that may be even construed as being paid towards the buyer's agent is paragraph 25, where the seller authorizes listing broker to advertise that seller may be willing to consider the following as seller concessions. Seller concessions cannot be limited to or conditioned on the retention or payment to a buyer's broker or other buyer's representative. And here, Donnie just written, seller pay 3% in concessions to buyer. You cannot say for the purpose of paying the agent. That's at the buyer's discretion, how they choose to.
You have to pay it directly to the buyer, so the buyer chooses whether to use that for closing costs or for,
Right, it'll be,
Something else.
it'll be a credit to the
Buyer.
buyer on the settlement statement. Yes, ma'am?
I have a question. So I actually wrote a listing agreement over the weekend, and I was completely unsure about how to deal with this. So if I need to change it, I will, but I put, what I did is I went to our current listing agreement where it says, you know, the amount of, you know, to be paid to the buyer broker or the selling broker, and I just copied that language verbatim and stuck it in
you
there.
can't have that in there.
No, I mean, I get that, but that's what I'm saying, there was no real indication of how to deal with it.
Matt, come grab this. Yeah, I agree, it's an uncertainty, and we're gonna talk about a different form in a minute, an alternative way of handling this. So what was the client's response?
I mean, well, you know, they signed it in 30 seconds, so you know they didn't read it, but I mean, but I just didn't know how to put it in there, and I wanted to make sure, I didn't think about saying that 3% concessions to the buyer, only because what if they're willing to give $5,000 in concessions plus 3% to the,
You
for
put
the
all of that
commission?
in there.
I mean, I get it, I'm just saying that, you know, there's, I mean, how we, I mean, it just seems ridiculous that you
But I
can't.
gotta tell you, the language that says may be willing to consider just makes all this a moot paragraph, in my opinion.
Well, that's why I put it
We're
in there.
now gonna be spelling it out in the purchase agreement.
The purchase agreement, I received one the other day, had it in there, like it was filled out, and the agent, the
Right.
buyer's agent wrote it in.
It's part of our purchase agreement now, right?
Yes.
Tom? Yeah, you can write in the buyer's agency, so here, I don't know, it's kind of just a stepping stone, you know, that, hey, remember we talked about this during the listing, you said you may consider, this is a good offer coming your way, you know, kind of thing, but there's no obligation whatsoever, to pay that.
I have one more quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
Do
Hey,
we have-
questions all you want to,
Do
guys.
we have to even put anything there?
No.
So I can leave my listing agreement as blank percentage to the listing broker. And then he can or she can choose at that point when we receive an offer, whatever commissions he agrees to. So I could have a 6% listing, and if that buyer's agent comes in and puts 2.5%, then that's what it is. And they pay me the difference.
Yeah, if you did 6% total in the other paragraph. And you could do that, I mean, we talked about doing that.
That's the part, that's what I'm saying is confusing to me. It's like if you're gonna put 6% there, it just would seem that the expectation to the seller would be that you would have what you have in that paragraph 25 or
Yeah, then
whatever
I'm
it
just
is.
not gonna fill out that bottom paragraph at all. I'm just gonna leave it alone.
Or why couldn't you put in the bottom
I think
paragraph,
maybe
cut
have
the
to put in what they're gonna pay me.
3% and then tell your seller to maybe might get the
You can put, Mary had a little lamb in that paragraph, because all it says is seller may, what this allows, it's really about the authorization to advertise.
But if you put something in there, doesn't it change the caveat of may, because now they're agreeing to it?
No.
No, because it's.
Seller may be willing to consider the following as seller concessions.
Yeah, but then if you write in seller to pay 3%, you negate the maybe.
No, you don't.
Yeah, you do.
So which
I
one
think it does.
It says may consider the following, and the following is what you type in.
Well, I think it's setting expectation is the point.
That's what I'm saying about a stepping stone, is setting an expectation. But it says may be willing to consider the following, and the following is what you type in.
Well, I think you would have to, after the word buyer, say for an acceptable offer. You know, you need to clarify that better.
Yeah, well, I mean, I went to law school a long time ago, but I'm telling you, the difference between may and shall, and may and will,
Yep.
may be willing to consider the following. Here's what we're talking about. You may be willing, to, and of course, all this is with an acceptable offer. Meaning the agent worth their salt is gonna be writing it in there. So if you're uncomfortable with this language or don't like it, we're gonna talk about the Alabama Association of Realtors listing form in just a minute, which handles this totally differently.
Can you just tell us which one you prefer that we use?
Well, I'm gonna tell you the pros and cons, and then we're gonna chat about it, and I'm just, you know, if I had a definitive answer for Rebecca, I would. And I thought I had it Friday, we talked about it over the weekend, I looked at it more this morning, and I'm like, ooh. So, yeah, we're gonna chat about it. Okay, we're still gonna request their signatures, like, it's now no longer we're on the listing form, I'm getting confused. Everybody's signing the document, and you have a contract now with an exclusive right to sell their piece of property with a stated commission amount, gross commission to you, and a consideration of concessions in paragraph 25. Okay, here's another option. The Alabama Association of Realtors form, which I talked to Robert Scott, he loves it, they're using this one, and I like a lot of things in it too. Got your hearing aids going off or nothing, what was that?
Sorry.
All right, here's the Alabama Association of Realtors listing agreement. It's a 5-pager. It includes buyer's agent compensation language. It does not include a few paragraphs we're used to in the VR version, which is warranted systems and components, the existence of survey and elevation, elevation certificate, rental information, and property owners association. Now, in my opinion, when you think about that, all those are addressed in our purchase agreement. This is just talking about during the listing agreement stage and your listing discussion. Doesn't prevent you from having discussions, and you should. I do every time. Hey, look, the offer we're going to get is going to say the seller warrants these systems to be in proper working order. If you got, as Chuck sold me, a piece of crap trash compactor, how many years ago was that, Chuck?
Yeah, well, at least you're over it now.
Many of you ever heard this story, but Dottie brought it up years ago at David and Carolyn Chapman's wedding. She said, "Hey, Kevin, what's the status of that trash compactor?" I'm like, "Shit, I don't know, it never worked." There's Chuck, he sold me the house. Chuck said, "I don't know, I think it happened in the fire. Ask Cleve." 3 people that have ever run that house were within about 8 feet of each
Was
other.
I the listing agent?
You were selling it to the Taylors.
Oh, I was selling to the
You
tenant.
were selling it to the Taylors. And then, of course, Dottie went ape shit when Chuck said, "It happened in the fire, I think."
One fucking fire.
That's when I knew I lived in Haneyville. I really owned this damn house was within a few feet of each other. But let's talk about this AAR agreement. It is an exclusive right to sell. I mean, is there something that's going
No,
to?
those are not highlighted, it's just boilerplate property
Okay.
information.
It's really similar, you know, seller's name, property address, listing period, starting and finishing the term of the sale, list price, and what they're willing to accept. Here's paragraph 4, seller's broker compensation. Compensation rates amount are not set by law or realtor associations, okay, individually negotiable. Just some more protection language. Seller agrees to pay buyer blank.
Pay sellers.
Seller agrees to pay seller's broker a dollar amount or a percentage of the gross price or other. All right, all are 0 if left blank. We're not gonna be skipping this paragraph. This is no different to what we're writing down. There's a place here in II where you can talk about if it's sold to somebody who you show the property to, that you're protected for a certain period of time. Not a lot different in things that all make sense to all of us. Here's the difference. It has a paragraph 5, optional buyer's broker's compensation, which was very much what BR had in place until the board of directors canceled it. Seller may, once again, may, but not required to offer compensation to buyer's broker. Such an offer is not required to list the property in MLS, and no offers will be included in the MLS listing. Seller's written authorization required prior to any offer being made. And here you go, broker is authorized, okay? This is the difference between seller may consider in paragraph 25 and this paragraph, in my opinion. Broker is authorized to offer compensation to buyer's broker. If authorized, select 1. Payment will be made by the seller's broker out of the compensation due to the seller's broker under paragraph 4 above. Or payment made in addition to the compensation in paragraph 4. Now, in my opinion, this is just what Jennifer's talking about. This is why I like this form, Rebecca, is I'm gonna put 6 in paragraph 4. And they're gonna say, what, you know, and certainly we've already discussed lawsuit, we've talked about what's going on, the changes in our industry with this selling client. And I'm gonna say, let me just handle paying them. You're gonna pay 6 total. Let me handle paying them. Let me take it out of my fee and just pay them, but I need you to authorize me in this next paragraph how much we wanna offer to them. So then I think you got a concrete situation, because you are authorizing them to offer the compensation.
I thought you couldn't pay it directly to the buyer's agent's broker. You can.
We can still pay each other commissions. We can pay on the beach a commission
Yeah.
as a broker.
We
You
just
can-
can't advertise it.
The question is whether we're gonna be able to do it in, as Dottie pointed out, whether we're doing it at the closing table, or we gotta come back and say, hey, Renee, cut a check for $15,000 to Sue Smith in North Beach. And I haven't got that
We don't
clarification.
know that answer
I
yet.
haven't got that clarification from AAR yet.
So then there would be a document, if that is what we did. There'll be another document.
You see, I'm on slide 8 and you're on slide like 21 right now. We're gonna cover, yes ma'am.
And if we put it in the contract that the buyer's agent's getting commission, would it all be on the settlement statements?
Yeah, I think so. I think that you're gonna, the title company may request a copy and say, all right, Kevin, you getting 6, purchase agreement says that Century 21's getting 3, do you authorize that? There may be an extra step to the protection of the title company. What else we got?
You keep clicking. It's kind of like.
I'm sorry?
You keep clicking.
If compensations are authorized, seller to determine how much, and here's where we're gonna talk about how much we're gonna pay them, whether it's a flat fee or a percentage of the total purchase price. All right? Offer to be based on type of brokerage service. This is something more based on whether they're a buyer's agent or whether they're a transaction broker. You know, we had a long discussion with this in our team meeting on Wednesday. I don't know how you really explain that to why the seller would care what the buyer's representation
That's
is.
exactly what I was thinking.
I don't know why it matters what they're getting paid.
I would put the same amount in both. I mean,
I would too.
or
Just check box I instead of box II.
Yeah, you select one. You select one or, yeah, I or II.
Yeah, select one, it tells you to select one. So I is if you're just gonna pay it, you're gonna say 3%. I don't care how they're represented, but if they're brought by an agent that has representation, whether it's transaction assistance or whether it's full-blown buyer's agency, I don't see why.
Well, how would you know?
You're not even know it till the purchase agreement comes.
That's what I'm saying, what is it?
Well, you're gonna know it in the recap section of the purchase agreement.
I've seen that in the Florida.
Florida's not gonna-
Florida has a different for
Yes, ma'am.
transaction broker and.
And no representation, however that works.
Yeah. And that's your third option.
Offers to be made on a case-by-case basis, a separate written authorization required. Seller acknowledges that making offers based on a protected class is a violation of state and federal law. So we're not gonna be discriminating based on the 7 protected classes. So you could do all 3, you could say, look, I'm gonna decide on a case-by-case basis. But I think that this makes things far more concrete than paragraph 25 may consider kind of thing does. Optional seller concessions, it doesn't mean that that's the extent of things. Seller concessions are payments seller agrees to contribute toward buyer's expenses. Seller does authorize or does not authorize a seller concession offer. If applicable and known, list concessions amount or rate. And you know, if you've got a specific $5,000 flooring allowance, or you're willing to pay for a 2-1 buy down or something along those lines, it can be specifically stated in that regard. Depending on the MLS rules, a seller concession offer may be permitted in the MLS, but must first be authorized in writing by seller. So that's what you're doing here. Here's a chance to offer seller concessions in your MLS. No, I don't think you can offer, you can put in the MLS what's being stated in paragraph 5 above. Okay. Who's confused?
I thought you could give a lump sum total that included the buyer broker
You can.
compensation.
Just can't identify it as
Right.
buyer's agency.
Right.
The whole point is that the buyer's agent's gonna have to work with his buyer to help the buyer decide how he wants to allocate whatever monies he gets.
I get it, but I agree with Kevin, it's like, I mean, it's gonna be so time consuming to try to figure out who's willing to do what. I think you just show the property and write it up however you want it to look.
Moving forward, this is just the rest of the agreement. Seller's duty, broker's agent duties, etc. Marketing the property, they ask for specific things. I don't know why we wouldn't check every one of those as a yes, unless you have some seller has some objection to a lockbox. Just more of the same boilerplate that goes on, and their signatures throughout.
I like
Okay.
it.
Yeah, I do too. Listing agreement addendum. Donnie, this is what we need to, this is the AAR's form.
Yeah, currently, we have a form that I created prior to us finding this form, where it discloses what's going on with the NAR and all of that, and you would get that signed by your seller, but here's a second option.
This is for existing listings.
Yes.
If you have an existing listing, and you don't want to do a new listing agreement, this is, as Donnie has it up in the left-hand corner, existing listings on bold. This is for, to be signed between them, and it does talk specifically about optional buyer broker compensation. It steals the language from the original listing agreement, so it adds that in here. Okay, this is all the same. Optional seller concessions, once again, you can do it in addition to that, and this can be sent to your existing listing clients as an addendum for you to keep on file, so you've been authorized what you can and can't do from a extension of compensation. Yes, ma'am, Nicole?
So if flip back to the previous slide, so if they say if compensation is authorized, seller determined, the same, blah, blah, blah. Now, do you fill out all that, and you put 3% there? And then on the bottom, do you have to put the concession again? You have to
No, it's
state
in
it
addition
again?
to.
That's where you would advertise something like a, $5,000.
That'd be a separate
buy down
concession.
or something,
Okay.
yeah,
Yes.
like what was in their listing.
Because basically, it says the seller may not specify which expense the buyer is permitted to apply concession funds for, but they're already agreeing to give 3% for buyer and broker
Correct.
specifically,
Yes, ma'am.
and they can do that.
Yes, ma'am.
So you said you had pros and cons for this. What are the cons?
Well, let's talk about it. Glad you asked. Not as forward thinking as Valerie was, but you're close. This is what I came up with. I mean, the AAR form includes buyer's agency compensation language. It's used statewide. So if you're getting offers from other people, Lisa had a Huntsville agent trying to make an offer on one of her properties and submitted a Birmingham Realtors form or something, or Huntsville Realtors form or something. There may be an opportunity here that this may be something we end up liking better, and we're gonna see it, coming out outside of that. Includes seller authorization. It includes the buyer's agency and seller concessions. Now, it lacks a few paragraphs, as we discussed, 4, 9, 14, and 16, but I think they're all gonna come back to you in a purchase offer anyway, a purchase agreement anyway. BR, there's absolutely no reference to the buyer's agent compensation. The advantage is it's local form, and you're gonna get local support. I haven't found AAR to be incredibly responsive, but I also haven't pushed it very much either. It only addresses the seller concession in paragraph 25. It does have 4, 9, 14, and 16. And paragraph 25, that we touched on, says seller may consider concessions. And I talked to Jennifer Fouch, and I said, Jennifer, you're gonna have to give me a good reason why I need to push the BR form versus the AAR form. And she said, as she told me before, she believes that AAR is gonna change their form in the next year, she said. She said the DOJ has filed an intervening brief saying that there should be separation of church and state. Listing commission should be discussed only on the listing side, buying commission should only be listed on the buyer side. And, she used this as a positive, that California's adopting this, and I'm like, well, shit, I would never get a California, if that's your reference. But, and I talked to Robert Scott about it, and he says he just thinks that's crazy. He said this makes the most sense to him. She thinks they're gonna well, Florida's doing this.
Yeah.
Florida's doing the same thing AAR is doing. And I personally would rather have the backing of the Alabama Association of Realtors than just Baldwin Realtors if they've gone different than what their state association has recommended. We're not gonna tell you which one to use. We're gonna accept them both. We're gonna honor them both, and you're gonna pick the one you're most comfortable with, or maybe you
Can we
may.
bastardize the AAR form and add 4, 9, 14, and 16 to it?
You know, I thought about that. The risk there is that we deviated from the state form and we lose the protection of their legal team saying we added those. You know, I've had attorneys call me and say, hey, we can create a whole custom set of forms for you if you'd like.
There's a lot of companies down here that do that.
Robert Stone been doing that forever.
Yeah, but
There's a lot of them.
they're definitely out there. I want the protection of a larger association that has lots of attorneys instead of one that tells me, I'm gonna write this up for you.
Maybe we could do an addendum to the AAR form that just has those paragraphs, because that's really to supply us
It's gonna be in the
information.
purchase agreement.
I know, but we want to know ahead of the time whether they have a survey or elevation certificate. We need to know ahead of time whether they're gonna have rentals in
I think
there,
it-
you know what I'm saying?
You know, and we're gonna add it, if we use this form, we're gonna add it to our client info sheet. I don't know if y'all do a client info sheet, we have them fill out with how old the roof is, your average utility bills, all the questions you expect the buyer to answer. That's how, at our listing appointments, we hand it to them, so this is your homework. I need you to fill this out to the best of your ability.
Will you share it?
What's that?
Will you share it?
Sure.
I think it has everything in it except for paragraph 4, but I mean, that's gonna be addressed in a purchase agreement.
We'll add it into our client info sheet. Now, it's not a written contract like the listing
Yeah, it's
agreement is, but it keeps us from bothering them. Like, look, we're gonna get calls with how old your grinder pump is, and how old your roof is, and what your average utility bill is in the summertime. I mean, so let's answer all those now. We won't pester you.
I agree with you, Kevin. I mean, if you think about the listing agreement currently says seller will or will not offer a home warranty. I always check no, but how many times do you negotiate that as part of the contract?
Sure.
99% of the time, probably.
Right.
So I agree.
Anybody else have comments before we move on to another form? I know that you're hearing this AAR stuff for the very first time this morning. Nicole, go ahead.
It's gonna be back on the AAR form. It mentions the holdback for taxes. And I'm finding that to be hard to explain to people.
So what?
The holdback for taxes, if you go back,
The
to,
rollback,
it says that if seller is not an Alabama resident, then buyer is required to withhold.
Well, that's
Funds.
how the form always
But
reads.
how to, we don't have that in the Baldwin form. We've not had that discussion necessarily.
You should be.
How does a
doing that.
buyer withhold it when
Well,
it's really the title
Title
company?
company.
See, that really
Yeah.
is Rebecca.
I don't know, I just thought that was kind of an odd.
we're gonna go, but I feel like we need to go back to the AAR document and make sure, I think that incorporates, there may be a couple of things that AAR goes over that Baldwin doesn't go
Yeah.
over, but, I mean, and everybody needs to review these.
You know, and we talked about this a few sales meetings ago. I keep picking on Rebecca, but because you keep having these situations.
Sorry.
She had a title company that was completely wrong on the buyer's status and who paid the money, right, Rebecca?
It was because they decided to take title they switched to take title in an LLC, and that changed the capital gains for the seller from to a higher percentage because the buyer was an LLC.
Why?
3 versus 4,
But that's part of
that.
and she was wrong, the title company
No,
was dead.
they did not change that.
They didn't change.
No, they did not change
I
that.
thought they did. I thought it was all the same amount now regardless.
They would not go back. They collected the higher amount because the buyer went to an LLC.
Well, you didn't have to agree to change it.
Well, the buyer, I don't want to get totally off
She
track,
had
but
already agreed to change LLC because I didn't know it'd make any difference, but now I know it makes.
I didn't know it came out that way.
No, it came out that way. Yeah.
So your seller had to withhold more funds for more
Because the
taxes.
buyer was an LLC, yes.
Yeah, it's crazy, yes.
And I talked to Pam, Pam said the buyer's status should have no effect on the
Yeah,
seller.
but
That's
there
right.
wasn't, because when you go back and read all the documentation from Alabama, it specifically states in there that if it's an LLC, it's.
I thought that was if the
it's
seller
higher.
was an LLC.
No, if the buyer's an LLC, the seller has, they would hold more.
We'll provide clarification.
Just-
They're paying somebody all that.
Just to simplify this thing, if we go with the AAR, put in a 6% commission, go to closing, and, the listing brokerage gets paid 6%, that doesn't keep the listing brokerage from paying a referral fee to the selling brokerage of whatever, does it?
But what's your purchase agreement say? You're saying you got a buyer's agency that didn't ask for anything?
No, it might, or whatever it said, I think that would be part of the deal. You talk to the buyer's agent and say, look, we got you covered.
Yeah, there's a
You know.
form that we're gonna go over in a minute.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. But I mean, that would,
But, I mean, Jennifer's point was she's gonna write in 6, and if they ask for 2.5, she's gonna keep 3.5. Is that what I heard you say, Joe?
I mean, why not?
yeah, well, if that's what you get, if that's what you agree with the selling brokerage with, then that's the way it is. I mean, we've been doing that with Eastern Shore for years.
Well, those were blanket discussions.
I understand.
Those were blanket discussions. Anytime that X and Remax and Gulf do business together, we agree to reciprocate, and
Right.
that got kiboshed.
Don't you have a compensation agreement though, form that you're gonna,
Yes.
okay.
So sit up here without me.
Nope.
My overachievers, God love them. All right, the VR purchase agreement, there is very little going on here, Dominique, except for,
One paragraph, really.
which is a new paragraph what?
Wait, where are you?
Oh, it's in the paragraph 4, buyer/seller closing costs paragraph.
Yeah, the third section under paragraph 4 reads, seller paid compensation of buyer's agent optional. Buyer may be obligated to pay buyer's agent pursuant to the terms of the separate agreement, the buyer's agency agreement. However, seller agrees to pay buyer's agent as follows. And here you have your choice between a flat fee and a percentage. And this is where the buyer's agent's writing in what their buyer's agency agreement says. They can't write in more unless well, they could write in more, but then they have to go back and amend their buyer's agency agreement. You could pay a percentage or a flat fee. So this is, here it comes, just like Dottie said, it's gonna be reiterated in the offer anyway. Here it is, regardless what your buyer's agency says, regardless what your listing agreement says.
It's all negotiable once the
This is
offer's put
it,
out.
this is here, yeah, and it's all because, as Dottie said, an acceptable offer. You know, thought you were going to do 3%, I was, and then you're gonna come to me with a donkey-ass offer either.
Someone give me one.
You know, so, here we are, now we're talking about 5.25 versus my list price of 5.75, things are changing. And anything is material, I mean, anything is, you know, people say, well, doesn't the seller have to do this if you offer full price cash? No, maybe the closing date's unacceptable to them. There are lots of things that can be unacceptable. So it all comes down to this document. This is the contract between buyer and seller to convey the property. All right, this amount shall also be paid to the buyer's agent if the seller's agent was acting as a limited consensual dual agent. If you get into that position of limited consensual or you having both sides, this comes into play. You know, people have asked me before in listing appointments, and I'm sure we all have the question, what if you sell it, Dottie? What are you doing? What if you're my listing agent and you bring the buyer? Now, I tell them it doesn't make a hell of a beach difference, except I really get along with Kevin really well, so I think we'll have some pretty good negotiations. Because Kevin is sharp. And I joke with him like that, I'm like, look, if I put somebody in my truck that's pre-qualified, I'm gonna sell them something. And if you're gonna take less, you're gonna offer me less because it's my listing, you're disincentivizing me to come show my own listing. I won't, I'll still show it, but you know, that's just against human nature. I tell them, look, I get somebody in my car, we're gonna buy something. And why should I get paid less to bring it to the table, if it's your home? So, I don't know if y'all,
So at that point, you have to have that buyer broker agreement once you go LCD? Just like, I
Yeah.
guess you usually do, and so that would.
absolutely, you gotta have it before they're in your car, or you're even virtually showing the property, you gotta have that buyer's agency in place, and only then can you transition to a limited consensual dual agent. That's no different, John.
Unless you did that transaction brokerage.
Then you don't have to go to LCD, you can just be assisting them as a transaction broker.
And only switch to a buyer once you narrow it to a property. Correct?
You're the listing though.
I'm going to buyer's agency straight away,
You know?
personally. You know, I'm not gonna do a transaction because the transaction broker shouldn't be offering, above and beyond those few stated items when they're out showing property. You're a tour guide with real estate professionalism and experience. You know, I've told you all too many times my story about the lady that refused to sign my buyer's agency. And she would ask me, what do you think? I'm a little worried about that, that looks suspect to me. Ooh, great question for your agent, do you have one? What? She was a judge out of Huntsville, we went around a number of properties, she had a question, what do you think about this? Ooh, man, that's a great question for your agent. Do you have one? No, she didn't sign anything, she just signed the recad. And,
Did she ever sign it?
oh, her daughter was with her. It was between Christmas and New Year's. You could shoot a 12 gauge down West Beach and not hit anybody, years ago, 20 years ago probably. And the girl said, my mom was a judge. Nobody talks to her like that. I said, well, we'll see what happens. So she picked out an Ocean House. What do you think I ought to offer? Ooh, great question for your agent. She goes, give me that fucking piece of paper. She went on to do a video testimonial for me and everything else, and became a great client, great referrer. Well, I said, those are agent questions. That'll be an implied agency. And I said, you're a judge, for God's sake. Then you know I've got all the risk and no reward. If I institute an implied agent by beginning to act like your buyer's agent.
So did she sign?
Yes.
Yeah.
She said, give me that fucking piece of paper.
Yeah, she could give me that right now. I'll sign it. Her daughter was like, man. Where are we here, Dominic?
This is the broker-to-broker agreement.
This is an AAR form, which is a broker-to-broker compensation agreement between Alabama brokers. Now, Dominic, the question we don't have answered here is, does it have to be the QB that signs this?
Yes.
That's what we're waiting on.
You
It
do.
says down here, let's talk about this. Compensation is between buyer's broker and seller's broker, listed there. The property description, it's specific to an offer that's being made on a specific piece of property and specific to that seller and that buyer. In the event the transaction is procured and completed as described below, seller's broker will pay buyer's broker, just what Charlie was saying, X% of the purchase price or flat fee or whatever is negotiated. This compensation is due at closing upon the occurrence of both buyer's broker procuring buyer who is ready, willing, and able, and the transaction being fully consummated. This agreement is subject to the following requirements. Seller's broker must obtain seller's written authorization prior to making any offer of compensation. Now, if you've used the AAR form, that's paragraph 5. They did authorize you to pay them out of your paragraph 4 compensation. Are you with me? So you already have that seller's authorization to do that. Buyer broker is prohibited from receiving more than is in their buyer's agency agreement. So even if you're offering 3, if they signed a BA, then only 2.5, and their buyer doesn't want to amend it up, then they can't get more than 2.5. All right, it's got an end date, starting date and an end date, in order for you to consummate the transaction.
So are you gonna send this with your offer?
No, this is for the listing broker to send back to the buyers.
But
Well, you
if,
said at
When
the
you
time,
get
I
ready,
don't-
send it
you-
before the offer?
if
Yeah,
you're
with the
representing a
offer.
buyer, if you're representing a buyer and you write an offer, my suggestion is that you send this form along with your offer to
That's
the
what I just
listing
asked.
agent,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I got confused, but,
Now, if we use this form, the AR, right?
Yeah, but-
Because it says it.
hold up, Rebecca. I lost my train of thought there. 63 is the new 60. Shit. This is, I would think you would have a conversation previously with the listing agent and saying, you know, what's your deal with your seller? Are you paying me out of yours, or do we have to go for it on our own? Is he gonna do it as a concession? You might have that discussion ahead of time, but it's no harm in doing this, you're gonna be asking for X percentage.
So, all the qualifying brokers for all their agents are gonna have to sign all of these.
We don't
We don't
know
know
yet.
that,
We don't know.
It's gonna be.
because we're gonna look at the bottom of the form in a second, and it doesn't contradict itself, but it's a little unsure. Rebecca, you had a question?
Why would we do that if it's in the contract?
Be involved in everything.
Well, because I don't care that we're signing a contract, we're starting off a party to the contract. Changing from listing who the listing agent was to signing who the listing agent was, still doesn't make you a party between A and B. This agreement is between Joe Seller and Susan Buyer. You know, this takes you another step, now you're obligating the other broker to pay you. Yes, ma'am.
Because it's like if you have, if you make an offer and you put 3% for a buyer's agent commission and the seller counters at 1% and the buyer signs that, then how do you really obligate getting paid? I mean, this is, if you get this signed, I think in advance, then I think the listing agent's obligated if this deal goes through.
I think you should present it before you present the offer.
I do too.
Maybe.
That's what I'm saying.
And I wouldn't think that we would be policing what their buyer agency says. If it's
This
to
doesn't
the
do
right.
that. This doesn't do that, it just says that, it says the buyer and broker prohibited from receiving more compensation than is in their buyer's agency. I'm not sure I understand.
So if they put more, if they put, 3%, and their buyer agency is 2.5%, that's not our,
Well,
the listing.
if I do that, the listing agent agrees, I'm going back to my buyer and say,
And-
look,
and amend.
we said 2.5,
Right.
but for the purpose of this house, they're gonna offer me 3, so I wanna amend that up to
Right,
3, so I
right,
can
right.
legally accept that extra 0.5%.
God, what a pain in the
Yeah, I'm telling you, it is, it's torrid.
So what if it's the situation that you use the Alabama agreement and you get to this and you're trying to negotiate with the listing agent and they have 6% and they don't have any terms of, they just say that they check the box that you're authorized to pay, and then there's no percentage down towards buyer's concession for the purpose of compensation. Now you're negotiating with the listing agent and the the seller's out of it,
So
so.
Tori's saying in paragraph 4 of the AAR, you had 6%, and in paragraph 5, it says
It doesn't say
nothing to the
anything.
buyer's agent.
Right.
Then
so
this
now
form
you're
would kick,
asking-
this form would kick in, and they'd be obligated to give you this percentage broker to
think you need
broker,
this
as long as it doesn't
I think
exceed.
you're crazy. if you
With
don't
seller's
use that.
authorization,
This form would trump the purchase agreement if you renegotiate.
No, see, the purchase agreement is not, is between seller and buyer, this is between broker and broker.
But they're telling you you have to put the compensation in the purchase agreement.
This is almost like what's on the MLS, like this is,
Hold on, guys.
that makes sense. Like, you know, when you're on the MLS and you see 2.5%, it's kind of like between, wait, you listed at 2.5%.
What this does is, you know, we talked in our last education session, stay with me, guys. We talked in our last education session about, we're gonna call the listing agent and find out what they're doing. Well, let's say you do. I call Valerie and says, yeah, he said he's willing to go up to 3%. I write that in the contract, and they counter back with 2, and you're like, what the hell? Well, I didn't know you were gonna offer 10 grand under, Val. You know, or Val's gonna say that to me. Here, this form says brokers agreed to pay you 3% out of their proceeds. I still think it's all gonna be handled at closing. I don't think we're gonna be having Renee write referral checks left and right. I think that with a copy of this, and it says in here somewhere, Dominique, that you have the right to give this form to anybody required. Oh, I got it highlighted. Must be furnished to the buyer, the seller, and the closing agent attorney prior to closing. So I think that's gonna give the title company authorization to go ahead and do it on the HUD, or the settlement statement. Anybody still iffy on this?
Yeah, the whole damn thing.
Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln?
So does DOJ just want realtors to not have
I
any
think I'll
commission?
give it to you.
They want better commissions probably.
Yeah, I mean, they just want the buyers to be able to
Well,
pay less overall, so there's
The
more.
buyer broker and
Just
the
a political.
brokers who signed it.
Nicole, that's a great question. That is exactly, that is guys.
I'm just trying to figure this out.
Wait a minute, Kevin, answer what she's saying, please. Nicole?
Yes. If you read consumer forums, the overall sentiment of the consumer is that buyer's agents get paid too much. This is the sellers, there is, the Consumer Federation of America has put out multiple documents, and they say, they recommend that buyers should not sign anything higher than 2%.
Fuck them.
In a buyer's agency agreement. Now, this whole lawsuit, was you shouldn't be setting commission, and here's the consumer group saying,
Set
set the commission as a consumer, but they're not obligated by the rules that we are. But that's exactly what's happening. They're trying to get this down, and it's gonna make your listings more and more and more important all the time, guys. Yes, Nick?
So, on the AAR form, if you don't mark 6% giving buyer's broker 3%, if you just mark 3% and then separate, buyer's broker gets 3%. You know what I mean? If you're not doing a split, if you're just offering them each individually.
We're talking about paragraph 4. I'm going too fast. Let's see. Okay, we're there.
Go to 4.
Get there closer. All right, here's 4. What are you putting in 4?
So if they're like, no, I'm gonna give you 3%, I'm gonna give the other side 3%. And rather than doing the 6% split conversation, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, let's-
So 3 here and
So if the seller's like, I'm gonna give you 3%, and then we'll talk about what the buyer's agent gets next.
Versus 6%.
Versus 6% and
Yeah,
say.
And then you
Either
can
way.
figure it out.
You can do it either way.
Right, but I'm just saying, if they harp on that, and then you get to that other form where it's saying that you're gonna cover it,
So what's the point?
are you still covered with this?
No, I would,
So I'm saying, if they fill it out that way, and then someone sends you that form saying you're gonna cover
so you
it.
tell me you only put 3 in paragraph 4.
Right,
That's right.
What'd you put here?
and then they say, you know what, yeah, we'll do 2.5, or even if they say 3, but they want it in there separate.
Right, and you check the third eye, is what
Correct.
you're saying.
Or if you
No,
check
Or
not
if
authorized.
you check,
Second eye.
What about in B, broker is authorized or is not authorized? So they're saying you're not authorized to offer compensation to the buyer?
no, I'm saying you go down to, they are authorized, and then you go down to C, and then you mark I.
Yeah.
The same offer to any buyer's broker,
Yeah,
3%.
yeah,
Right, but that's not 6%, that's 3 and 3,
That's
right?
right, that's the way I do it.
yeah.
Okay, but then in that other form, if you sign that, you're authorizing to pay theirs out of your proceeds, which is right now only 3%, right?
Right, because
They
then,
get
so
over the
in
6%?
box
Oh, I see what you're
number
saying.
B,
Right. So if you sign that form with the offer, and then if the purchase agreement comes back and they wipe out all buyers' agent compensation, you're giving them your entire
Yeah.
amount,
You
right?
said that's 3% total.
Yep. So you're gonna have to be real careful how you fill this one in.
Yeah, there's no point to this one then.
let's just put 6 everywhere.
Yeah.
God.
No, we can
Put
negotiate.
that one,
I
I
get
would
what you're
say
saying.
percent to buying broker.
No, you get.
So he said
Like
it
what
was.
percentage?
Well, you would do,
It's one or the other.
Yeah, this is,
One or the other.
this is saying what the seller broker is willing to pay. This doesn't say the seller, it says the seller broker. So Nick's situation is accurate. If you put 3 and 0, and they say we're asking for 3 from you,
Then you're.
That's your free.
now, once again, the purchase agreement's gonna say what the seller's willing to do as well. But this to me is a form that you get on the front end. Hey, what are you willing to pay, Ken? My seller told me 3. Well, I'm gonna send you a form.
yeah, I think that's a dangerous paragraph. I think that should be marked out.
Chuck, you've been pretty quiet.
He quit too.
Are you retiring?
It's like, well, it's been a good run.
Hold up, Joe.
Just thinking about the garbage disposal.
Yeah.
Trash compactor.
I still got the receipt if you
Whatever.
get Lynn to reimburse me, I'd appreciate
I think Jennifer ought to pay for it. She's the one that broke it.
I was like 3.
it. Part of it all's in there, so.
So when are we sending that for? When should I send
We
it?
may have just.
Before an offer, after an offer, like what, when?
Well, you know,
But you can't sign it if you have only three on the other, on your side, right?
right, you gotta say, look,
I don't see I don't see the listing agent signing this until they know.
Who's at the bottom? Who's at the bottom of this to sign it?
Buyer
Buyer
broker.
broker and seller broker.
Right, but I'm
You
just
provide
saying,
it to buyers and
I'm just saying, if I got this form from Christine and I have no idea how my seller's gonna negotiate, I don't know that I would wanna sign this.
Yeah.
that would be my, that was my.
And
concern.
then if you're trying to send this before you send an offer, some agents are gonna be so slow to respond.
Yeah, there's that.
I think you would do it after you've negotiated the purchase agreement, just to
No,
memorialize.
I would think it has to either go with it.
But if you have a purchase agreement.
this is an attempt, I mean, because like we said, that phone call, Rebecca, what's your seller willing to pay me? I mean, she could say what the discussion she had, but it doesn't mean that they have to follow through with it. This is what would cement that. But I see your point about why would the
Could
listing?
you not, on that paragraph, scratch out, go up so we can see that? Yeah, okay, where it says, seller's broker will pay buyer's broker, is there not a way to amend that sentence so that it's? Well, no,
Because the
no, I'm just thinking, to your point, Nick, you know, there's gotta be a way to amend that sentence to protect you for what you've got on yours.
Unless you're looking at their listing
Right.
agreement, you don't know how they've written up, how their split's gonna come. And if you're just taking the seller's broker's,
Well, even if you're the
Money.
listing agent, it's
And not
still a
the-
problem.
yeah, well, like Keith said, if I'm the listing agent, I'm.
Keep in mind,
gonna be very leery on
I
that.
think 2A takes care of this. Seller's broker must obtain seller's written authorization prior to making any offer of compensation to the buyer's broker. So if you got 0 written in 5, you're not gonna use this form.
Right.
All right, everybody with me? 2A, seller's broker must obtain seller's written authorization. So,
So make that a part of our listing agreement.
so there you go. I mean, that addresses the situation you're talking about, because if you don't, you're not gonna offer it out of the goodness of your heart unless the seller has authorized you in paragraph 5 what you can pay.
Unless you put 6% and authorization, then you have either 6% and you negotiate with the buyer's agent directly of 3%, 2%, whatever it is.
If you put 6 in paragraph 4, what do you put in paragraph 5?
Zero.
Zero, you don't fill out the 5 at the bottom, you put 6%.
You check that very last one.
And then you check the bottom, and then you have authorization, and then when this form is presented, you know that right now the seller is willing to pay 6% commission. But when you have this negotiation, if you give up, if it's 2% or 3%, you know you're still gonna get the other half, the
But do you
3%
have to have the
originally.
seller's
But
authorization?
you can't sign this saying, I'm gonna give you broker agent, buyer's agent 3% unless you have authorization from the seller.
I don't know why you even need that.
Okay.
I don't like this form either.
Be on the contract.
You just said a minute ago that
I did at first, but now that I've thought about it, I think it needs to be in the contract. If you're representing the that's what the lawsuit says to do.
The problem is when buyers back out.
It's a trap, no matter what.
hold up, you know. Rebecca, what's your point?
I just think it all needs to be in the contract, if it's supposed to be that everybody knows everything taking place, and this is a form behind the buyer's back.
No.
No, it says it has to be
It
furnished.
has to be furnished, the seller, the buyer, the title company, everybody has to see this form.
When
That's why it needs to be on the
closing,
contract.
prior to- That's why I think it needs to be in the contract. I
That's
think
right.
everybody needs to be part of the contract and put it in the
I don't think there's any question it's not gonna be written in the contract also. I'm not saying.
I just think you're complicating it by adding all this other crap to
I
it.
think you're adding protection to yourself by having this, if the buyer, if the seller broker says that they're gonna pay you.
Get it in writing.
This is the contract between two parties,
But if you.
and it's not the two parties that are selling and buying.
Right.
It's the two professional representatives. I'm using it, I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure I'm gonna use it.
You're gonna use it as a buyer's agent?
Yes,
When? After an offer? When are you gonna
That makes sense to me.
because my seller has authorized me in paragraph 5 of the listing form to pay me.
And you'll do
Out of my
that,
commission in 4.
you'll use that before presenting an offer or with an offer?
I'm gonna send it before, and it says it only happens if the deal consummates,
Are
Right.
you
but I'm
saying
still
as the
writing in
listing
the purchase
agent?
agreement too.
It ought to be loaded into showing time when you schedule it.
Buyer's
Buyer's agent, I'm sending it to the listing agent saying, you told me you're gonna get 3, you mind putting that in writing?
Charles.
And here's the writing.
Well, honestly, it would make the negotiation a hell of a lot smoother.
Yep.
If you've got this, because, I mean, just show property a few days ago, I reached out to all 4 agents were on the short list, and I said, I need to know what the commission situation is. And it was all very favorable, you know,
Yeah.
and so my thought was, you know, if I know that, I agree, if I have this document signed by that other broker, when I write that offer and I ask for 3% or 2.5% that I know I'm gonna get, I'm gonna feel a hell of a lot more comfortable in the negotiation of that.
Because the listing broker has signed it, and he is only able to offer it because in 2A, his seller
He's already
had
received
given him written authorization to do
I have a question.
it. Who's that?
It's,
Kelly. Hold up, guys, one at a time.
and just, you know, all my Ds are going on right now, my APD, my OC, all that stuff's going on right now. So I'm hoping that you're gonna help us later, or me, and just tell me how you're gonna do it, and tell me what to do, and let me just do that. But, that's not my question.
No pressure, Kelly.
Do it on the green screen.
My question is, let's say you have your, this is kind of going off in my head right now. Your seller says, okay, I agree to pay 6%, 3% to go to the buyer's agent. That's kind of a conversation that you have with your seller, whether you
She's
put it,
referring to paragraph 4 and 5 in the AAR form.
whether you put it in there or not. If they come back and they offer the 2.5%, they're asking for 2.5% to get paid,
The offer from
the
the
offer.
buyer says,
Correct,
compensate my buyer's
2.5%.
agent 2.5%.
Okay, and then you've got that extra half. I get, we're all like, okay, score, but what conversation do you then have with your seller? They've authorized 3% to go to, am I missing something there? You've got that extra half, do you then look
You
through
just
your
put it on
seller?
your
They
side,
don't have-
you
what
just
do you
put
do?
6 total.
It becomes a 3.5, 2.5 deal.
Yeah.
And your
Who's
seller,
gonna do
so
that?
you would not go
And then
back?
I would use that 0.5% in the negotiation process. If we end up $3,000 or $4,000, or $5,000 apart, I say, look, I'll just go, legally, I'm allowed to take 3.5, because you said you pay 6, they're only asking for 2.5, they can't get any more than what their buyer's agency form says. I might use that 0.5% to negotiate it down and kick in some skin, even though I was only hoping for 3% on the very front end.
But who's gonna ask for, who's gonna come out and ask for 2.5%? Unless you tell them that's what you're offering.
I'm just wondering if timid agents wouldn't probably do that, just to make sure they get, you know, a little bit of something's better than a lot of nothing kind of thing.
I think you're gonna
Worry
see
about
like
it.
2.5.
That's,
You're gonna have to
Patrick
have that buyer broker agreement that has that too.
thinks we're gonna find a lot of damn, and Robert Scott said this too, he said, we're gonna find a lot of damn desperate buyer's agents
Yeah.
who don't have any listings. And they're gonna say, sure, Chuck, I'll drive you around and hope for $1,000 if I can sell you something. You know?
that's kind of my thought too.
And I think those are gonna be $1,000 agents. Just like I tell somebody when they ask about, you know, that's not a bad example. Steve would be mad if I said it, so never mind. Yes, sir.
Sorry, so just real quick, one more time on this. On the listing agreement, when you're signing all that,
The AAR.
the AAR form, can that be negotiated on the purchasing agreement as well? So like you said, if they send a donkey offer, your words, not mine. And the buyer, the seller's like, screw that, yeah, tell them we'll take that, but we're not paying the 3% commission. Can that still happen on these forms?
It's all negotiable.
Okay.
All negotiable.
So that's my concern, is that if you're doing 3 and 3, and then you have, as a listing agent, the buying agent sends you this, y'all sign it, agree, and they send you that donkey offer, and your seller's like, bump that noise, tell them we'll take it, but we're not paying no 3% commission, and then you're still stuck. Because like you said, that offer's between them, and if they agree to it, you've already signed this. And then you're,
I would never,
Just say, I need to see your offer before I sign it.
Say again, Chuck?
as a listing agent, I would never sign that prior to me getting an offer.
Correct.
Why would you commit to something you have no idea? And as a buyer's agent, I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pick up the phone and call them. Hey, Dottie, I see your listing over there. I'm interested in what kind of co-broke commission you have on it. Dottie tells me 2.5, then I know it. Then at that point, I'm gonna get something in writing from her and I'm not going through this damn form.
Why is getting
You
something
would just
right?
put an offer.
This is getting something right.
Because that's what the lawsuit says.
I'm gonna put it in writing, I'm gonna put it in the offer, but I'm also gonna get something from you.
That's what this form is.
Basically telling me that you got 2.5%. Just an email or a text.
That's what this form does.
It gets very complicated, that form.
I agree.
No, Nick's right.
I don't have a problem with the forms, but I just wouldn't, I'd be worried about signing it before the purchase.
Well, this one says compensation is due at closing upon the occurrence of both. One, buyer's broker procuring buyer who is ready, willing, and able to buy property on seller's terms. And two, the transaction being fully consummated. So there's no agreement to pay anything if the seller doesn't agree to the terms of the purchase agreement.
But he's saying they did.
But what if they do agree and you are getting screwed by the terms of that purchase agreement that you already
Right.
signed this?
That's saying
Does
how?
this become part of the purchase agreement?
How are you getting screwed?
Like,
If they put in the purchase agreement a lesser amount to be
It
paid.
needs to be
by-
shared with sellers and buyers both.
But then it says they cannot accept more than their broker-buyer agreement.
Right.
Yeah, but he's
So they
saying,
can amend the agreement or they can lose that percentage.
So what you're saying is in the offer, they come back and say, I'll take that price, but I'm gonna only pay you 1.5%. But you've already signed that document, so they have a agreed upon contract, but you've already agreed to pay them 2.5% from this document.
The listing.
Yeah, the seller broker.
Well, that's brother agreement though.
but I mean, how's that any different than how we deal with purchase agreements all the time, where we have a listing agreement, and it says the seller agrees to pay 6%, and then in the course of all the negotiations, at the end of the day, you're not getting 3% anyway. I mean, but you never amend that anywhere in writing.
But it's different now.
That's my whole point. That's my whole point.
I'm gonna put it all in the contract, period, end of story. That's what I'm gonna do.
So that's what I'm saying.
My opinion is if the seller comes back and says 1.5 in the offer, then you no longer comply with that.
Well, I'm not gonna go by that.
That's between brokers, that's not,
That's not between the seller and the buyer, that's between
Seller-
brokers.
Seller's written authorization is surely between the seller and the.
Well, she is giving, they are giving compensation, they're just not saying how much.
Seller's broker must obtain seller's written authorization prior to making any offer of compensation to the buyer's broker. So this is you making an offer to the other agent for compensation. You have to have the seller's written authorization to do that.
Once you get the seller's written authorization.
I've got a good name at AAR that I'm hoping can deal. These are great questions. It's the reason I wanted to do this and have it, get your feedback and not do a role play and saying, here's how you have to do it, because I think we're hearing there's a lot of different opinions in this room. Yes, ma'am.
So Kevin, you said that you talked to, big brokers, and you said you talked to Patrick, and they're completely opposite in their approach. Do you mind me asking, did you and Patrick have a conversation about this document in particular and his opinion?
About the broker-to-broker document? I don't know that we did.
Okay.
I don't know. that
But we do agree that this is an optional document.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So make sure.
Well, I mean, to me, there's gotta be something that's got some teeth in it somewhere, because what happens if the whole deal goes, and all of a sudden the listing broker says, you know what? Yeah, I know we have this in agreement, or we don't have anything, a text or an email, I don't know that that's got enough teeth in it.
If it's in the purchase agreement.
Well, I want to avoid the situation that Rebecca pointed out, that we don't seem like the greed mongers when the counter from the seller comes back less than what you've asked for. And then the seller says, buyer says, what's the buyer gonna say? Oh, yeah, I'm willing to sign this.
Yep.
Well, you can't. Well, you have a buyer's agent, said you're gonna pay me 3, so you're gonna hold me hostage over 1 or 2% is how Rebecca put it last time. And I think it's a valid point.
That is what's going on.
Yes, we're gonna be made the bad guys. But they signed a buyer's agent, you better have a good discussion with that buyer's agent for them. Look, I'm gonna try to get this, it says right here, I'm gonna make my best efforts to get it all from the seller and the listing side. We'll let it know if that comes up inadequate, you and I gotta talk.
Then you'll never hear from them again.
So- But if they agree, the buyer and the seller agree with you at a 1% commission, and they go ahead and close that darn thing, we gotta go sue the buyer, I guess.
Correct.
Lord, that's the way I see it.
And Kevin, you're probably not gonna be doing that, are you?
Me personally?
Well, as the broker, would have to come from you, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, if you,
5,000 lawsuits on buying brokers.
you know, that's how this whole thing happened. Who got paid in the settlement agreement was the day,
You'll finish that law degree,
was the
so
lawyer.
you get paid for the legal services.
No, sure. Guys, we're gonna follow up with what we learned from AAR. There's two options. Patrick's using the BR form. Robert Scott's using the AAR form. Of course, you know, that may be obvious to you, but, the whole argument Jennifer makes is that AAR is not gonna, this thing does stay law. Florida's strong in using it. Florida is almost exactly like this. Florida says we're gonna
Well, what's the
specify.
downside, Kevin, of using the AAR form, which seems to be more straightforward?
I don't see a downside.
I'm just saying, I mean, just because BR thinks that they're gonna change that down the road, okay, well, so if they do, they do.
We change things down the road.
Yeah, they think they're being proactive, and they say this isn't gonna happen, this, and, you know, in Chuck's point the other day, when he and I talked about it last week, he said, you know, this, he thinks the AAR form, don't let me speak, or he said violates the spirit of the settlement. It does. You know, because you're now talking about what you're gonna sell or gonna
That's
pay a buyer.
exactly what I was saying at the beginning.
Maybe it does become outlawed or forced to change or whatever, but, I think it's so much clearer. I wanna try to get the 6 in paragraph 4 and say, I'm gonna pay, paragraph 5, I'm gonna say, we're gonna pay them out of my 6. You authorize me to offer them this much. So you do have a seller's offer to pay. Your whole scenario, the whole problem comes up in the counter
With
offer.
that money.
Yeah.
When the counter offer changes this, what supersedes what? It's a great point, and I'm gonna word it that way to the AAR. If there's a counter offer and you sign one of these, and the counter offer comes back at something less than 3%, I'm gonna use for an example to the buyer's agent, what's the game?
I think that's my biggest question. What is the final binding agreement?
It's a great question. Listing agreement's a contract, obviously the purchase agreement's a contract.
But if we have 5 different contracts,
That's right.
which one do we go by?
We're talking about.
5 different contracts, what do you mean by
No,
that?
I'm just throwing a number out. What I'm
We
saying
have
is
that,
all
you
these different.
you have 2 separate contracts right now. One's your
Yeah.
listing, your exclusive right to sell is a contract between you and the seller.
I just want to know what the final answer is. Like, that's my
Oh,
biggest
that's
question.
easy. That's all you need.
God,
Yeah, I mean, I wish,
what are we doing?
I wish it was black and white. I wish it was definitive.
So what are you gonna do in your listing and your selling presentations?
I'm going to.
That's all I wanna know, and thank you, by the way, for all this.
Yes,
Yes.
very
But
much.
I'm gonna do whatever you do, so what are you gonna do?
Yep.
That's,
He doesn't know yet.
I'm gonna call AAR and get answered a couple questions.
you know how you say, what would Dominique do?
WWDD?
Yeah, that's what we're gonna do.
WWKD.
I'm gonna probably do what, I'm gonna get. I'm gonna get right now, if I get the answers I expect, I'm gonna be going AAR listing agreement. If I get the answers I want. And that's gonna be, question here is what happens if you pre-offer. I'm gonna really ask AAR legal counsel, Jamie Kisla, at what time would she expect this document to be executed? Simultaneously with the purchase agreement? Simultaneously with the final execution of the purchase agreement? Or in advance of an offer?
Kevin, is there an additional provisions in here? I'm
No,
sorry.
I don't think so.
Okay.
This agreement will be modified or amended in writing signed by both
Plus,
parties.
you're gonna ask who's gotta sign this. When it says buyer's broker, is it agent to agent, or do we have to wait for the governing broker of all the companies to sign
Because
everything?
see then down here, it says selling
No
broker
signature
slash
block.
agent name,
That's what I'm asking.
which is just contact info,
Right.
but I'm gonna ask, is it a QB signature, or is it a agent signature?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Florida requiring doing a broker to broker agreement.
I don't know if they're requiring it, but there are
They have one.
agreements.
They have like 4 different.
They have 4 different ones,
Depending on the status,
yeah.
listing agent to transaction listing agent to buyer's listing agent.
I don't understand that. I
No
don't understand the
representation.
difference between why it's different. Who cares what the buyer's agent
As
is?
far as the compensation level.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't understand that.
I think that's because if it gets, provided to a title company, or I don't know why it matters, but they just want
So
to know.
let's wrap up with a few reminders. Believe it or not, there are new agency forms available. As we recommended last time, explain each option in the recant and each option in all of these. And you're gonna get a lot of questions. Well, what's wrong with a flat fee? I think 10 grand is a hell of a lot to sell my house, Kevin. Why don't you just agree to 10 grand? So, I don't know. Let me ask Jennifer.
Don't ask me, I'll probably do stuff for
Well,
free.
you're gonna get that question. I did have a request for that
You did,
last week.
you sure did. What'd you
My
say?
buyer's dad came in and said, we're gonna make an offer on this house, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to get your fee and then pay it as a kickback to my son, my daughter and son-in-law.
Oh, Lord.
How did you?
Did you show him the door?
No, Andrew, I didn't. Andrew said, why didn't you tell him to, well, it's a longer story. And he said, we'd be setting a great example. We'd be making a lesson to our kids that there are good people out in this world that do good
Oh,
things.
my God. Oh, my God. So how did you deal with that?
I said, you know what a better lesson would be? Teach them when you employ somebody's professional services, you pay a reasonable fee for those services. And he said, well,
Man, I can't think that fast.
he said, it's gonna take you 20 minutes to write an offer. I said, I've been showing him property for a month. We showed, he said, but that's unskilled labor.
Well, let's see how.
Let's not. I think I just stood up. I think I just stood up. I've been in this for 40 years, and I have 40
Then you
years.
say your
I
license
think
got
you
you
should go
in
get
the
somebody else
property.
on this.
Let's go through these few slides.
Is that guy on TikTok or
Cousin from
something?
Myers. I cousin
All
from
right.
Sellers. What happened to y'all?
Back in time, or what's that?
Did you do, what'd you do?
I found out there was a seller's bonus, a list, or seller's bonus on the house. And I said, I will give that bonus to the equation. Well, I wrote him back, I said, I regret that you feel me showing houses as unskilled labor. Not mean I picked those houses that met their criteria. We showed them houses that, as a buyer's agent, I pointed out the pros and cons to each house and talked them out of a number of houses that were not right for them. And if you consider that unskilled, then I'm sorry, but that's what I do for a
How, what was his response?
Didn't mean to offend me, sorry, that's not what I meant.
But Kevin, before we wrap it up, that flat fee thing, which I would imagine would normally be less than whatever the percentage would be, what's your advice on a buyer or seller who may suggest the flat fee thing?
That depending on the work put into this, you spend 3 times as much time with a buyer as you do a seller. But the marketing efforts, and I'm gonna talk about my team's expense, Dominique's salary, Veda's salary, all the fees we pay, all those things are apportioned into it. But the real question is, why do we get paid $3 million, 3 times as much on a $3 million listing as we do a $1 million listing? We all know the pain in the asses are at the lower levels. I think it's a great question, Karen. It's gonna cause some introspection. I know I didn't give you a good answer there.
But I think sometimes, I'm thinking about that, Karen, specifically, and just thinking about the fact that before I put a buyer in my car, I've probably spent 8 to 10 hours minimum
Yeah.
before I ever meet with them.
Well, you're talking about the buying side. I think Karen's asking about the listing side.
Well, okay,
I
well,
want you to
either
list my
way.
house for about
It's either
$10,000.
way, I think it's either way.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time, like she said, we all do.
I wrote a listing description over the weekend. It took me 2.5 hours to write the listing description.
Yeah.
Not put the listing in, but
Right.
just to write the
God, you're
description.
saying that,
So-
Just plug it in ChatGPT.
What did she say?
We're not gonna kick anybody out of this room when we finish.
She's chatty.
Let me go through these few remaining slides. You all can chat as long as you want.
Oh, no.
Buyer's agency agreement in place prior to 8/17. Have client execute the new version of the buyer's agency. We also have, there's an addendum you can send to it that is more simplified, that just says, hey, as of August 17th, we gotta follow new rules. I need to talk to you about my compensation on the front end before we go any further showing houses.
So you can do the addendum instead of sending.
Another full-blown buyer's agency, yes, ma'am.
So, with-
But it basically, it's very similar to,
It ain't a lot different.
yeah.
but this does not have to do with something under contract.
No,
No.
but if you're showing property to people and,
If you still haven't ratified on the deal, If you have buyers agencies or stuff, they're floating people you're working with.
Right, but you're ratified and ready to
Yes,
close,
sir.
that's, okay.
Then you don't have to do it if you're ratified, is what you
Correct.
said. Okay.
Listing disclosure, have it signed for all existing listings. It's nothing more than that statement that says commissions aren't set by associations, governing bodies, or anything else, but are always negotiable. And you did, you negotiated at the time you got your listing signed. Buyer agency modification to amend compensation previously agreed upon. That's a form that's out there now too. If you had somebody sign you at 2.5%, you got an offer from the seller, the listing agent said we're gonna pay 3%, modify it so you're willing to accept, so you're able to accept that other 0.5%.
That's out there already, that form?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
What form? Come on.
Amending
These are in
the
dollars.
Amending your buyer's agent,
Okay.
Dobbins
Thank you,
already
Dominic.
put it in document. Okay, compensation disclosure, this is it. It's all you have to send to an existing listing, is this disclosure. Here's the buyer agent modification agreement, who was just asking about that? Here it is, it's not, it's one page, it's not as much as the other, it just talks about, big old disclaimer, broker compensation is not set by law. Okay. Review your active under contract pending listing for any verbiage related to buyer workers' compensation. It's not allowed. Send all listing clients the compensation disclosure. We just talked about that. Add compensation language to your agent website, social media. I have a quick question. Karen, where are you? Karen, you had a buyer's agency meeting last Thursday or Friday?
Pretty proud of myself.
And you came back and told me that they agreed to a 3% compensation level.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share with us how that went? And-
Yeah, because I don't even know how to do that.
Well, I think first and foremost, these are fairly reasonable people, that probably helped a lot, but, I just said this is new to all of us, we're all kind of really trying to figure out how to make all this work, and if I don't talk to you and went through the form as you did in the meeting, and the different aspects of it, if I don't ask you to pay me the 3%, then I won't be eligible for it. My goal is to get the seller to compensate everything, and that will be what we go after in the purchase agreement. But if he's offering 3, and I ask you to give me 2 or 2.5, then I'm ineligible for what he's willing to give, or her, the seller. in
So
general.
how hard did you push the fact that you're gonna do your damnedest to get it from the listing side?
Hard as I'll get out, and to, let them know that if we get to the point of negotiating less than that, I'll be more than happy to consider negotiating down, but if we don't start out right here, I would be amiss at serving you and myself and the whole situation.
Good for you. Well done.
I said that to somebody, because they were trying to understand what was going on, and I'll be first to, I highlighted in yellow that paragraph that specifically says, it will be my intent to pursue blah, blah, whatever it is, from the buyer.
Buyer instructs you to do that.
Yeah, because it's already written in there, I thought, well, I put a big asterisk next to it and highlighted it, because I wanted them to know that I was working in their best interest first, and that not in my own best interest.
John, with your vast experience in teaching real estate, do you have any comments?
Excuse me, I just woke up.
We had voted for you and Susan to cover the cost of the bar. You're still good with that?
No, it's gonna take me a while to get my arms wrapped around all this.
You know, I started this whole concept 2 or 3 or 4 weeks ago saying, Donnie, this ain't a whole lot different. You've been doing it right, you've been doing it on the front end, you've been doing buyer's agency on the front end. And that needle's
That
moving a
needle's
little
moved,
bit.
because that's what I said too.
That needle has moved back to like, this is the cluster.
Yeah.
Kevin, I've done 4 in the last week, and and pretty much handled it the same way that Karen just said that she did. And people have been great. And, and I did it at 3, and I said, now, if it's 2.5%.
You done it 4 on the buying side.
4 buyer agencies, yes, and put 3% in all of them.
Has anybody done a
That's
new
great,
listing
Susan.
agreement?
I did it, but I didn't fill it out properly.
Somebody new listing.
How'd it go?
And, I have no problems at all. In fact, I had a seller tell me yesterday he'd be willing to offer more than 6%.
Yeah.
Wow.
Things aren't selling. He's got a dog. He's got a dog.
For what it's worth, Kevin, some buyers I showed last week, she's an agent in Indiana, And she told me that she's written 3 offers so far that they're already implementing. They don't have the, they call it BBC, Buyer Broker Commission. She said there's no BBC in the MLS, is what she said. And she said on all 3 offers, she said only one of them, the seller reduced to 2.5%, but the other 2 were full 3% as the buyer's agent, just for what it's worth.
Christine, you had a buyer interested in the property on Eastern Shore. Talked to the listing agent, she said the seller's not willing to pay a dime to the buyer's side. And then furthermore claimed that the other offers she'd received, nobody had asked for compensation in the purchase agreement.
So she said if you're asking for buyer's compensation, just forget it.
Wow.
And did it go into contract?
Let's forget it.
No, my people ended up, they didn't want to
with
get into a
anybody.
multiple offer situation.
I mean,
So
with
we-
anybody.
But did it go under contract?
I haven't looked as of this morning.
I'm curious.
Now, another caveat to that, and I talked with Jennifer Fouch about this, you said they listed it artificially low
And it seemed
In
very
order-
low to me.
in order to get multiple offers, which they did.
Obviously, those buyers
That's
are
what I
willing
was
to
told.
pay.
Hopefully those buyers are willing to pay that buyer's agent that was successful.
That's a strategy, though. I mean, that is a strategy.
Yeah, because
Jennifer
That's
said
a
that,
strategy.
Jennifer
you
Fouch
take
said she's
that
heard lots of
commission
brokers
out?
talk about that.
And go lower, try to get you multiple
You
offers.
go onto the market and you just say, look, you
But the only
can get it
difference
from
there
the
is
buyer.
there would be financing.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, if you have somebody that says, hey, look, I think this thing's 25 grand under market, let's see if we can get it, but I'm gonna need you, they probably won't pay me anything, so I need you to stick to your buyer's agency obligation. And we say, well, can I roll that into my mortgage? No, you gotta have that 20 grand if we're not
From
gonna
a
pay
seller
that.
standpoint, they're probably netting less anyway. I mean, it doesn't make
Yeah,
any sense. You're not paying another broker, but you're taking a lot less.
I think you're doing an injustice.
Behind the
to
seller
your
net sheets are
client.
gonna be very complicated going forward.
We are, revising our Excel template to add the required disclaimer about how commissions are negotiable, blah, 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 blah. And then I'm guessing we also need to have an option on that where you can, when you do an estimated cost to close for your buyer,
You're gonna add commission. You're gonna add buyer's agent commission.
they need to see that they're obligated to pay that if it doesn't come from the
That is when
seller.
the-
So
You made
we're
that
working on
match
that.
offer, right? So I accidentally did that to one of my buyers. I put in the 2.5% that was in MLS and then carried it forward to the buyer's brokerage fee. And then I forgot to minus it out on seller paid costs on the other column. And they're like, wait a minute, do we have to pay this? I said, you would if they weren't paying it, but they're paying it, so you don't have to.
So we'll have a new version of the Excel sheet to come out soon. This week.
As divergent as Patrick and Robert's views were, they were congealed on one thing, and which shares what I've been telling you all along. This is only gonna be better for the good agents. You know, people that can't handle this, people that don't have good brokerage leadership, people that are new in the business and write 1 or 2 deals a year, they're either gonna screw it up royal, or they're just gonna get so frustrated by it. So I think that it just means, it's a better deal for everybody in this room. We know what we're doing, we stay on top of things, and, we have these type of discussions. So in the end, I think it's gonna be better for the good agent, but it's gonna be, buckle your seatbelt for the next month or 2.
Kevin, I've heard a couple of agents say that they wouldn't take a listing if they're not gonna offer a buyer compensation.
I may have been as bold enough to make that statement myself.
So, do we take it?
I didn't put it in writing.
I mean, I'm not,
We talked in team meeting, we're gonna take them, protecting our side. You're saying that somebody said, I'm gonna pay 3% and nothing to the buying side.
We don't know how much you give of your commission, but you're only getting 3%.
Are you gonna walk away from that listing?
Right.
I'm gonna tell you, I can tell you right now,
No.
whatever we sign today, I would think 9 out of 10 offers we get are gonna have a request for buyer's compensation within there.
I agree.
So, and it's not coming out of my 3. 3's already my business plan as a marketing expert and paying all the things I gotta do in my overhead, and I need 3% on the listing side. So you can be prepared, but I'm also gonna get phone calls left and right, and they're gonna say, what's your seller offering? I'm gonna say, I'm not authorized to offering anything. The seller said no. So, but put in your offer if you want. Is that where you wanna be, or do you wanna be the one with this listing agent who's trying to decide they've only got half a day, they're gonna pick the 6 best houses? It shouldn't be based on this conversation at all, but human nature, you know.
Well, I got a little 80-year-old couple that are coming to look tomorrow.